Welcome to OreoOlive.com. As you know, Oreo and olives don't mix, but the abstract thought of putting those two words together has enlightened me to create a channel to discuss various topics. On today's episode, I wanted to take a look at the statistics in black marriage. I wanted to talk about this specific topic because oftentimes growing up, as I can remember going through high school, I remember a lot of people who were getting married at an earlier age in life. And people that were getting married at an earlier age in life happened to be people who were non-black. And I never took the time to actually think about why does this happen? Even going through college, people were already selecting the person that they wanted to be with. Now, oftentimes, as we all know, across different cultures and lines and things of that nature, that people are extremely different. People think of different things in different ways across cultural lines. And so that's definitely a good thing because oftentimes that gives us the ability to find opposites. And as they say, opposites always attract. Now, in today's episode, I wanted to specifically look at the black demographics and seeing why a lot of black people are not getting married at the rates equal to or more than any other culture that we have out there. Now, as I was looking at this and looking at some of the statistics on this, what I was able to find was some very interesting information. And what I found within our community is that about 30% of the of black people total are married versus 50% that have never been married. Now, you can also look at the 12% that's divorced within that amount of people, as well as the 6% that are widowed, due to a spouse passing or dying or so forth. Now, 3% have actually been separated. So just seeing those numbers alone, with 50% being never have ever been married, and when you look at that number and you compare it to um, um, black men overall, that number increases to 52% of black men have never been married. Now, we can't leave the black women out, the sisters out, so we have to look at the numbers for that too, and it's not too far off being at 48%. Now, when you're looking at the total of black men and black women and blacks across the board being married, you have about 30% of the black population being married. And then when you break that down into men and women, you have about 33% of black men that are actually married and 27% of black women that are actually married. Now, those numbers, um, there are, you know, are still less than what the average number of people that are married in the United States. The United States overall, um, is about 48% of people that are married versus the 34% who have never been married. And so these numbers show different kind of ranges and everything, but when you put these together, it kind of don't make a lot of sense. But you also have to think about different factors that may be the reason why people are not getting married, especially within our community. Now, you can bring things in such as the number of black men that are in prison, the number of black men who may not opt to get married because they basically control the access to marriage by simply asking that woman that they've been dating, whether they want to get married or not, and being able to control that portion. But the numbers, you all, are just, they're very interesting because it doesn't necessarily state why. So you kind of have to do your own research and figure out, and sometimes almost make assumptions of probably why a lot of people within our community are not getting married. Now, when you look at the statistics by race, between black men, black women, when you look at the Hispanic culture, when you look at white, when you look at Asian, we tend to talk a lot about those races because that's what we have here in the United States mostly of. You're mostly going to find white, you're mostly going to find black, you're going to find Asian, you're going to find Hispanic. Now, in other countries, I'm sure we can definitely pull up statistics and look at that, and we can definitely say that for the next conversation, because oftentimes, especially at times when people are in the military, sometimes the men may marry women of other nationalities from different countries, but their percentage is very small, and we'll get into briefly that in a minute since it's coming into the U.S. But when you look at overall the amount um, of black people getting married, you look at the 50% never get married, but then when you look at Hispanics, only 43% of them don't get married, and 43% of them actually do get married. So those numbers are almost equal, but then a small percentage in there of them are actually divorced compared to the 12% divorce rate between black people. Now, in terms of white people, you have about 52% more of them being married versus the 28% that are not. Now, the small percentage of them, as well as in the divorce rates in the United States, is the exact same number, about in the 12% mark of what black people are in terms of divorce. Now, we definitely cannot definitely want to talk about, in the Asian community, 58% of them are actually married compared to the 31% who have never been married, leaving only 5% of them who actually are go through a divorce. Now, the numbers in terms of separation are very small, and they're only in the single digits across all races, which could be, black, Hispanic, and white, which range about 1 to 3%, including Asians being 1% as well. Now, let's take a moment and let that all soak in, because within our community, oftentimes, depending on where you grow up, people are going to get married to whatever that they are around. So, for example, if you're black and say you lived in the hood all your life, you more than likely are probably going to date and marry somebody within the hood and within your own community. Now, if you are black and you live in a predominantly white community, the chance of you probably marrying or dating someone that's within the community that you live in is going to be extremely higher. So you more than likely are going to marry somebody from your specific community. Now, when you tackle that onto work, you also have to look at it from this perspective. You can have, say, a manufacturing facility that's 98% black, and someone may not be married and they may be dating someone in that facility, and the chance of them dating somebody of the same race is going to be very high. It's going to be higher than it is for someone who is looking to go across the opposite perspective. So you can take that same analogy and look at it from the place that you may hang out. So if you go to places where you normally won't see a lot of black people, a lot of Asian people, Hispanic people, and so forth, and you always go to those places to hang out, then you increase your chances of likely meeting someone in that specific race. So you're going to end up dating. So you have to take that into consideration as well. Now, with all of that, I want to definitely take a dive into the interracial aspect, because when you're looking at the interracial aspect of dating, what you have to keep in mind is interracial dating does not always equate black and white. We only see that in the United States because that is what the majority is here in the US. Being a person like myself who's traveled pretty much to a lot of countries and across the world, I've seen interracial relationships of all different nationalities. I've seen, being in Germany, I've seen blacks marry Germans. I've seen German people with like Russian people. I've seen Bulgarian people marry German people, and even going overseas into like China. I've seen, Chinese people marry black people. I mean, I've seen it across all different forms, but we oftentimes, when we think of interracial relationships, we always think of the poster situation as always black and white. Now, because we're here in the US and we're focusing on those statistical numbers, what we want to look at is that when they did the research in 2015, about 15% of black men were married to non-black women, and that was up from a few years back in 2010 when it was actually used to be at about 11%. And so when it was 11%, basically in 2010, in 2017, it increased to 15%. So more black men have married outside of their race. And then you can also go down another step and, and ask the questions, well, why is that the case? And just like I stated earlier in the conversation, based on the surroundings where you are, is going to determine who you're probably going to end up marrying. Now, with the increase of black men that's marrying out of their racial demographic, you also have to keep keep in perspective that 25% of black male newlyweds in 2013 were married to non-black women, compared to the 12% of black women who married outside the race as well to non-black men. Now, keep in perspective that when you hear me use the terms non-black, I'm talking about any and every racial line that could be, down from there. I could be talking about Bulgarian, I could be talking about Croatian, Czechoslovakian, I could be talking about Dutch, French, Spanish, I mean, what have you, okay? So I want to definitely let you know what the terminology that I'm using here so we're not getting confused and everything, and also could include white as well. So now, the number of Asian women and the number of Native American women still have higher rates of interracial marriages as well. Now, black women were least likely to marry non-black men, which was about 7% in 2017, and only 4% were married to white men. So oftentimes you may see black man, white woman. Very few times you see white or black woman and white man. Now you're starting to see more diverse relationships across the board in terms of people who may be, black or white, marrying Chinese, Japanese, and so forth, depending on what country that person, is traveling to. I remember being in the Philippines. I remember seeing a lot of white men in the Philippines who were either dating or married to Filipino women. So it just depends on where you go. So just because you don't see it in the U.S. doesn't mean it's not happening, because being a person, like I said, that's traveled just about all across this globe, I've seen it in so many different shapes, forms, and fashions. Now, even though the number of black people getting married or not getting married was extremely larger than the number of black people that are married, for the ones that are married, more than 85% of them have a black wife, and that is the black men. So the black men that are getting married, out of that number, 85% of them are having and marrying, have a black wife, basically. Now, with 9% of the black men that are getting married from there as well have a white spouse. Then 3% of them have an Hispanic spouse, and then the other 3% is on other different nationalities, which could be anything. So it doesn't necessarily state that specifically. Now, there were more than 479,617 more married black men than married black women. So black men were getting married more than black women, but you also have to keep in mind that that also includes other nationalities as well. Now, when you look at black women, 93% of black women who are married also have black spouses. So you have to look at as well that the 4% of black women that were married had a white spouse or a white husband, and 2% of them had a spouse that was Hispanic, and the other 1% was basically of someone of another ethnicity. Now, those numbers can be tricky trying to combine them all together, but you have to separate them out and move and tuck in here and there just to really see the data with your eyes. Now, how many black men and women have married out? Well, from about 2017, the number of black men who had a white spouse, when you break the numbers down from the percentages to the numbers, was about 409,000 black men had a white spouse, compared to the 172,000 black women that had a white spouse. And the same goes for the Hispanic spouse and other spouse between black men and black women. Is the black men who had a Hispanic spouse was about 162,000 compared to the number of black women who had a Hispanic spouse, which was about 82,000. That was all back in 2017. I'm sure those numbers have probably changed a little bit right now between 2017 and 2022 at the time of this video. Now, when you look at the other 1%, you're looking at the 130,000 black men who had a spouse who was of another ethnicity, compared to this 53,000 black women that had a spouse of another ethnicity. Now, when you look at the history of black marriage, based on the census in 2012, which, the census always kind of go back so wild to kind of get a very large percentage of numbers, that they found that African Americans over the age of 35 and older were more than likely or more likely to be married than white women from the 1890s until sometime around the 1960s. Now, not only did they swap places during the 60s, but in 1980, the number never married for African Americans or black people began a staggering climb from about 10% to more than 25 in 2010, while the percentage of white women that remain under 10% or just below the 10% for white men. Now, when we're looking at the information, what was very interesting is when you look at between 1890 and 2010, what you will notice is that the percent of people never married among women were age 35 and older by race between those years. But one thing that really caught my eye with um, black men that were getting married is the percentage never married among black men age 35 and older by race between 1890 and 2010. That number was around 5% and it jumped all the way up to 25% as far as never being married. So is you also have to think about the number of people that were in the world or around during that time versus like right now. Those statistics will definitely have to get that information, but you also have to include factors that decrease the chances of black men getting married. And one of the biggest things is when you look at the number of blacks in prison from back in the 1900s to 2010, that percentage rose from about 5% all the way up to 25%, which was you had about 23,370 black men in prison up to 572,900. So there was almost a 500,000 black men in prison. So when you have that factor like that in there, that means that they are not around in order to select a wife or a spouse to help increase the number of black men and black women that are married. Because if you didn't have the black men around to propose to that woman, then the marriage statistics for the black men, of course, are going to go down. And this was when the war on drugs and its effects on the black marriage between the 1980s and the 1990s. And you really saw it take off between 1980 during the Reagan and Bush 1 and the Clinton administration between 1981 and 2001. And you saw it actually almost vertically climb around 2000, which was around the Bush 2 and the Obama administration. And this increased the number of never married black men during that time, and it continued to continue to happen to that go to that level despite the decrease in incarceration. So the U.S. compared to every other country was number one on the list in terms of incarceration, more than any other citizens in any other country in the world. So when you look at factors like that, that's embedded within these numbers to decrease it, can also explain reasons why. And also you can have in there as well that the number of black men who may not opt to get married. So what you have to remember is marriage is not for everyone. Marriage doesn't work for everyone. Some people are just meant to be single. Some people just want to be single. Some people just want to date as many people as they want, and it's totally fine. There's no pressure for people to get married. But the statistics and the numbers that we're seeing is most definitely higher in terms of never marry and lower in terms of marry. And then when you really don't think that the number of blacks that are married, it's like, okay, these numbers really show like where everything is according to today. Now, overall, looking at the black marriage and everything, and just seeing where we are, it still remains the same. And especially in 2022, this is the time where people are just wanting to date how they want, when they want, wherever they want. And so I'm going to try and do another video, and we're going to break down and look inside the Black family. And we're going to look at some numbers in there because people, I tell you one thing for sure, the numbers don't lie. And the numbers will tell you everything that you need to know. And that's why I love reading and doing research and finding topics that are very interesting and to bring to you. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. Like, listen, and subscribe, OrioOlive.com. Look forward to talking to you soon.